In this lesson, I want to address the tidbits about the French character I haven't explained earlier. How France is changing quickly, moving away from the clichés, in part because of globalization. I want to delve into a comparison of cultural traits between France and the UK and the USA. I want to revisit the usual tired cliché about the French. I want to explain the French approach to religions. I want to explain why France can afford such a generous welfare state. And I want to explain a bit about the French political context. Like many other rich countries, France is changing under our eyes. There is the influence of other cultures, the American soft power. There are many more McDonald's in France than in any other country outside of the USA. But not only, lots of kebabs, lots of pizza, more sushi, and more mangas in the cultural sphere. There's the impact of tourism becoming a core industry in France instead of the heavy industries of the past, which has a major impact on local economies, on employment, real estate. There is the evolution of the French approach to work towards leisure-focused society. People have always been into their free time, but nowadays, much more than in the past, possibly because they no longer see how they make a difference in their job. Also, post-COVID, 25% of people are working remotely 2 days a week or more. There is the French people's adaptation to a changing world around them, social networks, and the increased climate change awareness, which is clashing with an increased US-influenced consumerism. It has to be said that in a country where the people in Paris make all the decision, the French voters are increasingly disillusioned with the inability of politicians, left, right, or center, over the last 30 years to formulate and implement any clear vision for the future. In that, France is not unique, which probably explains the political mood swings we're going to discuss a little further. At any rate, we are witnessing a quick, by historical standards, transformation of French society, becoming more individualistic and more multicultural than in the past. Talking about individualism, let's delve in the French character in some sort of analytical manner using the Hofstede model, which is a framework widely used to understand the differences in cultures across countries. Let's use this model to compare France on one side and the UK and the USA on the other. Here we go. We've seen that France is becoming more individualistic. This model shows that France is already as individualistic as the UK and the USA, only in different ways. Two other things stick out. In France, kids are raised to accept more inequalities than in the UK or in the USA. That's the power-distance dimension on the chart. Power is more centralized. Parents, bosses, politicians, even all the motorways in France lead to Paris. The French don't like surprises and require planning and structure, which makes them good at developing things like nuclear power plants, rapid trains, or airplanes. That's the uncertainty avoidance dimension. To learn more about this model, well, stop the video, grab your phone, and follow the QR code to a specialized psychology website. Social interactions may be more formal initially in France, with a strong emphasis on politeness and manners. There's a strong tradition of respecting personal space, and greetings often involve a kiss on both cheeks. Also, France has a more hierarchical social structure, and there's often a clear distinction between social classes. Titles and status are important, and there's a certain formality in addressing people. Mealtimes are still significant social events. In contrast, Americans are known for their informality and friendliness. Social structures are generally more fluid, and people are often addressed on a first-name basis, regardless of their position or status. Also different, the British are known for their politeness in use of understatement, with queuing, for example, much more a cultural norm than in France, and greetings typically even more reserved. In France, communication can be pretty direct, with people expressing their opinions openly. However, there's a value placed on articulate expression and intellectual conversation. Americans tend to be more informal and expressive than the French, and British communication tends to be more indirect, with the use of understatement and politeness and humor, which is often used as a social lubricant. In France, there is a history of skepticism toward authority, and protests aren't uncommon. There's also a long tradition of intellectualism. In a comparable way, in the US, there's a strong emphasis on individual freedoms and a history of challenging authority with a strong tradition of civic engagement. In contrast, in the UK, respect for authority is generally observed, but with a tradition of questioning authority through satire and humor not usually found in France. Punctuality is important in France, within 15 minutes, but there are a more relaxed attitude toward time in social settings. For example, meals are often leisurely and can last for an extended period of time. Punctuality is possibly more highly valued in the US than in France, both in professional and social contexts. Meetings and events are expected to start and end on time. In the UK, punctuality is highly valued, and adhering to schedules is crucial. Arriving on time for appointments and meetings is considered a mark of respect. Relationships in France often take time to develop, but once established, they can be deep and enduring. Friendships may be more reserved initially. In contrast, Americans are often perceived as more outgoing, more open, making friends more easily. Professional relationships can also be more personal more quickly, but possibly shallower too. Relationships in the UK may progress at a slower pace, with individuals taking their time to get to know each other before committing to a more serious partnership. The French prioritize work-life balance, with often a distinction between work and personal life. There is a strong emphasis on taking breaks and enjoying leisure time, and the 35-hour work week is a well-known feature of the French workplace, although not for the 3.9 million self-employed people who work much more. That's kind of in contrast with the work ethic in the US and the tendency over there to put in extra hours, especially in certain industries. The British are somewhere between the French and the Americans. They are known for their punctuality, and the work culture can be more formal. Tea breaks are important, and the pub culture plays a role in after-work socializing. France's centralized education system emphasizes academic specialization, leading to the baccalaureate exam determining university entry. Education is viewed as a means to social mobility. In contrast, the decentralized US system prioritizes flexibility, with students choosing diverse courses and undergoing holistic evaluations for university admissions. The UK has a more decentralized education system, with a strong tradition of prestigious universities and a focus on a well-rounded education that includes extracurricular activities. I am tired of all the clichés about the French you can find on the web. So, let's try and debunk the most common ones. Here's my selection down there with my opinion for each. And I want to comment on some amongst them. About the frog legs. Most people in France have never eaten frog legs. And those who have will tell you that eating a frog leg is not worth the work. It's so tiny and tasteless. The secret is the sauce, just like snails. About the French rudeness. French waiters in Paris are famous for their rudeness to everybody, including to French people. So that don't take it personally. Smoke. Well, smoke is no longer prevalent. It's been forbidden in public spaces since 1995. About the university system in France. Yes, it's pretty much free, and that's a good thing. And the last one, about French cleanliness or lack thereof. This is one of the worst and stupidest clichés created and cultivated by the British tabloids, stemming from a survey from 1998. The survey showed that each French person used only 600 grams of toilet soap each year, compared to 1.4 kilo for each Briton. But what the survey did not mention was the fact that, at the time, shower gel was way more popular in France than it was in the UK, which explained the difference. Bloody ridiculous. Among the things that are different in France is the approach to religions, what we called laïcité. To understand religions in France, you need to understand what laïcité stands for. As a matter of fact, this very concept is considered by many to be an essential part of what it means to be a French citizen. Once again, we need to look into history. In 1905, a law was passed to expressly separate the church and the state. When it came into effect, so did the freedom to practice religion or not. The latest constitution from 1958 uses the word laïc to describe the French Republic, where laïc is often translated into English as secular. But this translation is off. It doesn't convey the appropriate sense of the word. Laicity may be defined as the complete isolation and separation of religious spheres from public spheres. This means an absence of religious involvement by government into public affairs and vice versa. For example, it would be considered a serious error for a teacher to discuss religion in a public school. There is no God saves the president or swearing on the Bible in France. Nope. In the same spirit, no conspicuous religious symbols are allowed in public buildings and schools, effectively banning the wearing of hijabs, kippas, and crucifixes. The ban caused some, principally outside of France, to see this as an interference by the government in the religious life of citizens, but that would be the wrong interpretation. It is important to understand that this set of laws is by no means a weapon against religion. It's only about returning all religions to the private sector where they belong and guaranteeing state secularism in the public sphere. The French Republic does not favor any particular religion and should aim at maintaining their peaceful coexistence. So within that context, Roman Catholicism was once the state religion of France, well until 1905. But today, only 25% of the French identify as Catholics, and only 5% of those Catholics now attend church weekly. Many rural villages used to see the local church building as a symbol of their local identity. Well, no longer. The number of priests was halved between 1990 and 2015, with very few left today. Catholicism is no longer a major influence in French society. France has the largest Jewish community in the European Union, about 440,000 people who self-identify as Jewish in social surveys. They are accounted for in the 1% other religions. France has one of the largest Muslim populations in the European Union. Amongst those who migrated to France, some feel Islam is a part of their personal culture, but only a minority of the younger generation embrace Islam as a cultural identity. Here's the difference. Most of the others join the ranks of the non-believers. Even with all this joie de vivre and seemingly dysfunctional system and politics, France still manages to be the 7th wealthiest country in the world. That's thanks to its entrepreneurs, which you may know little about. So here we go. Well, first, on a linguistic note, the word entrepreneur, along with about 40% of the English language, is a French word dating back to the 12th century and popularized in 1803 by Jean-Baptiste Say, who was a disciple of Adam Smith. That's him in the picture, according to Andy Warhol. Let's address one cliché head-on about France being a socialist country, according to some. France is indeed a welfare state like most of Europe. It is a collective choice enabled or built upon a very solid entrepreneurial culture. Here are the facts. In 2022, over 1 million businesses were launched in France. Well, that's 15% more than the 870,000 in the UK the same year. According to the London-based Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, in 2022, France was named a better business context for entrepreneurs than the UK, Italy, or Japan, although behind the USA. According to the EY barometer, France is consistently the best place for foreign direct investment in France. And some figures, some people you may have heard of, because France is the birthplace of many innovators and entrepreneurs. Bernard Arnault, who turned a small real estate developer inherited from his dad into LVMH, Louis Vuitton, again, the largest luxury conglomerate in the world, and became one of the world's wealthiest person in the process. Emmanuel Besnier, whose dad, André, founded Lactalis, which is now the second largest dairy products corporation in the world, behind Danone, which happens to be another French firm. And in the tech world, Pierre Omidyar, who founded eBay, Luc Julia, who is the father of Siri, later bought by Apple, Philippe Kahn, who created the first camera phone, and Jean-Marie Hulot, who is the father of iPhone when he was working with Steve Jobs. To finish this lesson about the French people, I need to discuss politics, briefly, a bit reluctantly, I have to say, because this is clearly a very tricky subject to cover in this course about real estate. But as the political context is important to investors, and as I regularly get questions by my customers about what's going on in French politics, and as I know that having an understanding about the politics of a country where you are thinking of buying a house is important, it would be to me, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. This overview is not an explanation of the French political system, which is covered in the next lesson. The idea is to provide you here with an analysis of the French political landscape and my reading of the mood changes of the French voters. This video is being shot in spring 2024, and things will certainly change in the future. So please do keep in mind that I will adapt this section when required. So here we go. France has been governed by mostly center-right government since the 1970s. Briefly more to the left when François Mitterrand was elected in 1981, but, well, that didn't last, and Mitterrand proved to be much more conservative than some had thought earlier. Then, in 2017, there was Macron's Big Bang, the youngest president ever, and more importantly, the creation of a wider center bloc around one man, Macron, and a seemingly fresh approach to politics. The quick consequence of Macron's victory was that the old establishment parties were marginalized. In 2022, the Parti Socialiste and Les Républicains together got less than 7% of the votes. Those two parties have governed France for decades. That's harsh. But all is not so cool, because in parallel, the French populist parties have grown, and, well, they're no longer French. Today, we have a National Assembly pretty much stuck with three almost equal groups. Macron's LFI, that means La France Insoumise, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's a grumpy old former Trotskyist, who, funnily enough, or not, he's a Trump clone in all of his attitudes. And the far-right RN, which stands for Rassemblement National, led by Marine Le Pen, who's an ambitious lawyer, daughter of the guy who founded the party and claimed that the Holocaust probably didn't exist. And she supports Putin now, anytime she thinks journalists aren't listening. These days, Macron is scrambling to prevent Le Pen from winning the next presidential election in 2027. He doesn't want to feel like Obama, who had to hand over the keys to the White House to Trump. We'll see whether he finds the magical trick. Now, If Le Pen makes it to the French presidency, there will be Europe. The French have absolutely zero intention of leaving the EU. They have watched the UK, among other things. Le Pen has already tried to float the idea of a Frexit, which would be a French Brexit, and abandoned it. If Le Pen became president, she would have to behave like Meloni in Italy, i.e. abandon most of our pledges, because of France being part of the European Union, really. And that's if she ever wins a legislative majority, which is highly unlikely, and would then put us in a situation comparable to the USA. So, none of that is really cool, but it appears that France is, well, just behaving like the rest of Europe in its own way.